Hello, and welcome to episode 66 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin, that's Kevin.
I just don't think that we are epistemologically capable of assigning causes and origins for events. What does it mean to do something, to have something be done, to incite something? It's so tough. It is so tough. And for that reason, any allegations Colin has about me being the one responsible for Planescape Torment, dear listener, let me tell you from the outset, they are lies.
Kevin, I know this is your fault. I know that you're the reason why we played Planescape Torment, which I'm just going to put this out there because I know that there are some people in our community that really liked this game who have probably have fond memories of it. They think the narrative is incredible. Um, and this is something that you're going to talk about as well. But I think we should just put it there at the forefront that if you're looking for a positive review of Planescape Torment, this is not the place to go. If you want to play this game blind, you should do that. You should not listen to this podcast. Thank you for the download. Get the fuck out of here. This is us reflecting upon our recent experiences. Spoilers will be everywhere, and potentially not the nicest things will be said.
This was part of the game challenge that we instituted in the early spring. And it was a way for the both of us to get the other, well, one, to have more games played in common, which we are kind of divergent on, and two, for us to take a game that really defined, what we come to games for, what we get out of them, the kind that we choose and seek out, and have the other experience something that informs our worldview of what we like in games, why we play the games we do. Now, one chose Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, and the other chose Planescape Torment. Who did which is um difficult to remember after the passage of time. But I think it's interesting how both of those games, they're not the newest. They're from the 1990s, 3 decades ago.
Path of Radiance isn't from 1990s.
One of them is from the 1990s, 3 decades ago.
Path of Radiance came out in 2005.
So,
It's not even 20 yet.
okay, just gonna move on past that. Why was Planescape Torment chosen? The reason it was chosen was that for someone to be able to experience a narrative heavy, narrative focused game where the actual gameplay is admittedly secondary to experiencing the narrative. Combat is not the forefront. You can go through most of the game with killing very, very few people. The final boss you don't have to fight in what is
As I found
a
out.
very unique situation. It's about, to give a brief overview, it's set in Planescape, most of the city of Sigil for the setting. It's a realm within the Dungeons and Dragons role playing tabletop game. You, the player character, you awaken as the Nameless One, an amnesiac corpse on a mortuary slab, and your goal is not to save the universe, not to save the city. There's no kingdom being threatened, no marauding orc bands. Your goal is to discover your past. Who are you really? The overarching question that the game stands by is what can change the nature of a man? Is redemption possible? Does regret count for much, if anything? It's a very character focused game, and you are given basically no meaningful customization of the game. You don't control your past, your name, your attributes. You control the class and the skills, charisma, intelligence, wisdom, and so forth, but you have a set past, and you discover this past throughout the game. The future is not meaningful, which is kind of surprising to think about. It is the past, how the past informs the present.
See, here's something that kept popping up into my head while I was playing the game because you brought this concept up before that the game challenges you to think about what can change the nature of a man, makes you think about, is redemption possible? No, it doesn't. It asserts this as a deep question, like two-thirds of the way through the narrative. It does not explore this question. It just uses it as a way to make things sound mystical and more important than they actually are. And this game is filled with concepts like that. I agree that the premise of trying to discover your past is an interesting one, especially when you take into account the fact that a lot of people seem to know you, seem to know divergent versions of you. The nameless one, whenever he dies, loses his memory. So the game tells you, except you can die a lot and then you still have all your memories. So I'm not really quite sure where that's coming in. It does not impact gameplay that much at all. But it is interesting to think about, is it a nature versus nurture thing that causes the divergent nameless ones coming out? The world of Planescape, the world of Sigil, I found to be quite interesting. I really enjoyed exploring this environment for like half the game. But I think that on its narrative, it's not as deep as it wants to be.
So, about the world, one thing I want to say in its favor is that we often see serial numbers filed off of generic fantasy settings, tropes, places, people, races, copied from medieval Europe, copied from Tolkien, copied from D&D, in fact. I think one of the things that you can say in favor of Planescape setting, it is not a carbon copy of medieval England circa 1250.
No, it is very original.
So there's that. So one question that we grapple with, how do you review a game? What makes a good game review, a good game critique, and the game critic as a person? How do you do that? It's not like reviewing, say, a book or a movie where the what's presented is basically going to be the same for the reader, for the listener. And for Planescape Torment, how do you review a game where so much is dependent on choice? How do you solve the problems? What quests do you do? Do you not do? What party members? There's a lot of that kind of customization in how the game can be and is experienced. A strength, constitution, dexterity focused
Mhm.
game will play quite differently, I think, than, say, intelligence, charisma, wisdom.
I mean, probably. Uh, it seemed to me that the game, in doing an overview of the stuff that's available to you, it seemed to me that the game is trying to push you into a intelligence and wisdom um, build because there are certain really important lore moments that you can only access if you have like excellent wisdom and excellent intelligence. I'm thinking specifically of the conversations with Dakon, where you're learning the teaching of Zerthimon. This is really important stuff for the backgrounds of the characters, for building stats up for Dakon, and for the lore of Planescape in general. So it's almost like you have to do it. And yet, if you don't have 19 wisdom and 19 intelligence, you're shit out of luck.
Yes, I want to draw attention to that. The game de-emphasizing combat. How often do you see that in an RPG where talking things with or charisma or figuring things out can lead you to success in 95% of cases? Colin, there are 3 fights that you have to kill someone in the entire game. One, the zombie when you first wake up in the mortuary. 2, the night hag Gravel. 3, the diva Trius towards the end. So the beginning, the middle, and the end. You don't have to kill anyone else in the entire game. There's other solutions.
You don't even have to kill Trius, you just have to fight him. You can let him go free, though I ended up letting Vylor kill him. Um, See, I also kind of disagree though with the idea that this game de-emphasizes combat because you go through a lot of dungeons in which you have people attacking you. Most quests, not okay, most quests don't necessarily need you to kill stuff, but there are some that will straight up require you to kill people. One that pops on top of my head is that when you find Chad, in the catacombs in order to get the information that he has about the decanter of endless water. You have to go kill some monsters. You cannot do that quest without killing the monsters. Now, you can find the decanter of endless water without talking to Chad. But if you're trying to do all the quests, if you're trying to do his quest, you must kill the monsters. But also, like, just walking around Sigil, you are attacked a lot. You are attacked all the time by thugs that you can run away from them, but you're constantly then being chased by people who want to do the stabby, stabby, stabby. And to top it all off, a lot of the quests offer you incentives, like quest rewards in terms of equipment. Or when you're looting things, you find a lot of weapons that might be cool. Yet, if you're doing a mage-based um, character like we were, you can never use them. And I'm not just talking about you, the nameless one. Your party members can't use them either. Anna can use some of the daggers you find, cool, but Morte can only use his teeth. Dakon can only use his own sword. By the time you get Vylor, you like I had this heart ripper or heart render weapon that I got from a demon that I had to get before I met Vylor. But the weapon that Vylor has by default is better than that weapon. And nobody else could use axes. It seemed like there was a lot of incentives for combat. There's a lot of focus on combat, but it's ultimately useless because the combat system is trash. And the game is not designed for you to actually take advantage of the systems that it has.
Okay, so is this rant out of the way?
Oh, there's more coming.
Okay, you made a lot of good points, and in lieu of addressing them all, I'm just gonna say, nuh-uh. I could in response to the eloquent points that you made. So, the execution of the game is not the narrative. But that raises a question when if we were to assign a numerical score to this game, any game, and we talked in detail a bit about this last night, how do you combine and meld the
I mean,
two?
it's an inherently subjective thing. When I was talking to you, I rated the game a 7 out of 10 because I thought that the game had promise. There's some interesting ideas here. It's not a broken game by any means, and for a while it did captivate me. Um, but its execution really tore it down, especially near the end.
Is it too long? If it was a couple hours
No,
shorter, would that have been better?
I mean, I finished it in 21 hours. I think it might have felt long near the end when things got really repetitive and I was just waiting for it to be ending. But I mean, like Yakuza 4 took me 60 something hours. This game is not too long. It's basically as long as you want it to be. You could spend more and more time exploring, which I think is to its credit. It has a lot of content. Uh, but I do think that it drags because the plot, again, is not as deep as it thinks it is. And so there's a lot of time wasting. And there's a lot of red herrings isn't the right word, but there's a lot of like just dragging out the process of figuring out what happened to you.
And as part of this dragging out, something that we both experienced, you almost have to have a separate window of a guide of how to do a lot of quests. Two, the game does not spoon feed you information, map markers, hints, what say you. You have to pay attention and figure things out and think laterally. A lot of times, though, it leads to frustration. I am not I am not having fun playing this game. Those 8 words are the death knell of any computer game or any video game. What say you? If you didn't have a guide, you would encounter those fatal 8 words within 15 minutes of starting the game.
I've been grappling with this a lot over the past couple of days because I think that the game is designed for you not to use a guide. Uh, a lot of it,
Oh
a
yes.
lot of it is about your encounter in Sigil, your construction of the Nameless One. Play how you want to play. It gives us so many choices. The reason why things are not spelled out is because it's asking the player to engage in a way that modern RPGs simply don't. And that I think it's very ambitious. It's very interesting, and it's to its credit. I do wonder if I would have had more fun if there wasn't a guide. The problem that I had with the guide part is that there's a lot of moments in which, like, theoretically, you could do whatever you wanted to do. But in reality, one dialogue option kills the guy, and the other dialogue option gives you 90,000 experience and a fuck ton of gold just for clicking the right option. And this mismatch between levels of reward means that there's always an impulse when I'm doing a quest or talking to an NPC to go and find the consequences of my actions before I do them, because I know that there is clearly a right or wrong way to do it. There's also a lot of missable stuff that either really impacts the narrative at the end or is just nice to have around that I wouldn't have found without a guide. And so I found myself constantly having my eyes glued to a guide, which took me out of the experience. And this is something that I face
Mm.
personally a lot when
Yes.
I play Western RPGs or CRPGs in general. It's something that I faced when I played the KOTOR games. I was constantly looking at a guide. The Witcher 1 as well, same thing. And I do think that it's a personal problem, and I'm not sure how to really incorporate that into my review of the game, but it is something that I experienced, and I think it's, like when we play Trails, I will look at a guide for things like, okay, are there secret quests? But for the most part, I just play the game and I enjoy it. That is not how I felt like I could interact with Planescape.
I give you that there's a lot of options for the dialogue, but you are very correct that some of them are objectively better, more correct than others. You would only do some of these choices if you were intent on role playing, say, a homicidal psychopath, say, not even the practical incarnation, but a sadistic, stupid incarnation, because options of XP gains can sometimes be tens, hundreds of thousands difference between the outcomes and resolutions.
And like you kind of want that experience early on. It's really important for power level, which impacts your stats, which impacts other options you can do. But as you move on in the game, it takes millions of experience to level up sometimes. One quest at the very end, right before the final fight, if you pick the right dialogue options, you'll get 2 million experience. But if you don't know that, then you're shit out of luck and you don't get it. Which I guess, I mean, again, like I could easily see
This can
somebody listening to this complaint and say that's what makes Planescape great. The fact that you can miss that stuff, the fact that the game gives you all of these options. I totally understand that argument, but I'm not sure that I'm that kind of player.
and that's fair.
Kevin, can I bitch about something?
Can you talk then about what the past 15 minutes were? If not,
I think you mean my modulated, tempered, sober analysis of Planescape Torment.
yes. Yes.
But okay, Planescape Torment does something a lot that I describe as the Kingdom Hearts phenomenon. Concepts are tossed out there, and you need to just figure out how they work. And most of the time, these concepts are what drives the narrative. And so maybe one you can accept the plausibility of without knowing how things work, but then they keep going on top of each other, going on top of each other, going on top of each other, that leads to frustration. So the one thing that I found particularly obnoxious is this, when it starts coming out when you talk to .com, but it pops up elsewhere, is this concept of, do you know? Do you know what this is? As opposed to merely what? Not knowing? Like, all it seems to do is take the word no and put asterisks behind it that makes it look fancy, that makes it look deep, but it's not. It's just knowledge. Well, like, okay, this one, I can at least say, okay, there isn't a difference between true understanding versus nominal understanding. Fine, maybe they're trying to push that. But then it gets to things like, but do you know your name? The name is really important. By knowing somebody's name, you can, by knowing their name, you get true mastery over the person. Meanwhile, when I'm down in the Dead Nations, there's a zombie who lost her name, and I earned 5,000 experience by telling her it doesn't matter, and she should just take a new fucking name. But nowhere is it explained why not having a name means that you're free from people's control. Nowhere is it explained that by knowing somebody's name, you can control them. I don't understand why that matters. And you could say, okay, well, this is something that you could just ignore. Except that's how I beat the game. I'm talking to the final boss, Kevin. I'm going through the dialogue options. I'm waiting to get to the bottom where, maybe there's going to be a fight. Maybe I can revive my party members that are laying dead on the floor. And instead, what I say is, I know your name, and the game ends. I beat the game by accident because I discovered my name, except I actually don't know what it is. It didn't tell me what the name of the nameless one is. It just told me that I knew it. What is the name? You said it was Jimothy. So that's bullshit.
I'm sorry you hate on that name. I apologize to all the Jimothys listening to this podcast.
If there's a Jimothy out there, I am sorry, but I heavily doubt that. But there's another thing that I want to bitch about in terms of things that don't actually make any damn sense. So, right before the final scene, you meet your previous incarnations because you're in the Fortress of Regret, which is a place that seems to I couldn't tell if it was constructed by the good incarnation because of his regret, or if it was constructed by the transcendent one, which is your mortality. I'm going to bitch about that in a minute. But when you're talking to your previous incarnations, they all want to merge with you. In no way do I know how the merging happens, because apparently you can just stare into each other's eyes and will it to happen, and then all of a sudden, boom, these people who can never die have disappeared and merged with you.
It's metaphysical.
That's not an explanation.
Counterpoint. Yes, it
It's
is.
metaphysical. Kevin, I stare into your eyes like every podcasting recording session, and yet you're not coming through my computer screen to merge with me, physically or metaphysically.
We don't live in a multiverse universe where magic is possible, where resurrecting the dead is possible, and we are not in a negative energy plane where it's even more silly.
Yeah, that's the word though. Silly. I don't care that we don't have magic. Magic has to have rules. You can't just say, see, zippity doo dah, there's magic, things happen. This makes for a terrible causality. If you can't understand linearly how things work, it's a bad experience.
Does magic have rules, or does it have to be predictable within the confines of the setting?
To me, that's the same thing.
But if you don't know how it functions in the granular details, but if you know basically what's possible, what's not possible, what has a cost, time frames on a general sense, that's different than having magic be almost a science where it can be, I don't know, deconstructed.
Well, I mean, there's a difference between magic having rules and me
Okay, yes,
knowing the rules. I don't necessarily need to
yes.
know the rules, but it does have to follow a logic. I have to be able to predict it. Things have to make sense. Even if it's kind of like when we're talking about plot twists. Once things happen, I have to see the plausibility. And some of these things, they're just asserted rather than explained or made plausible. For instance, you come to learn that at some point in your past, the first incarnation realized that he has done so much evil that if he dies, he was going to go to hell. So he asked a night hag to tear away his mortality. Now, Kevin, what is mortality? Mortality is the physical state of being able to die. Somehow, when Ravel tears his mortality away, it becomes sentient. And for some reason, if you don't have mortality, it means you can't remember things. Nowhere is it actually explained why being unable to die means you can't remember things. It's just asserted as, oh, well, the body is the anchor, and without mortality, you can't remember shit. Well, guess what? I don't know why that's the case.
Well, it's not the kind of immortality that, say, an elf or other immortal creature has. It wasn't done by one of the gods. Like, it was, kind of a rush job, inelegantly, inexpertly done by a night hag, so there's gonna be complications.
So why does that? I mean, Kevin, you just because you described this is how the mortality was taken away doesn't explain the central premise of now when he dies, even though he's immortal, but when he dies and is resurrected, he can't remember things. Nowhere does that tell me how that happens. And another thing, I don't know how mortality earns sentience. But the transcendent one is the main big is the big bad guy at the end who seems to have this whole dastardly plan of what appears to be just wanting to be left alone.
Well,
Why is his mortality sentient?
'cause, you know, stuff.
That's the problem, Kevin. I don't know. I and this is something that really drove me nuts about the overall conceit of Planescape is that by it poses these questions about redemption or about what can change the nature of a man. I say pose because characters say the questions. I don't think the narrative does a good job at challenging you to think about them. Um, but the way that it explores it is by breaking with our schemata of reality too much. I don't mind there being fantastical creatures. I don't mind there being different planes. I don't mind there being like an intraplanar war between different types of fiends that is barely impactful on the narrative itself, and yet somehow it's the most interesting thing that the narrator can come up with. But instead, it takes these metaphors of abstract concepts of mortality, of knowing, of other shit, and personifies them and gives them agency, but doesn't explain how that happens, and it doesn't explain how that actually helps us explore the values that are supposed to be explored. If you make somebody's mortality sentient and the big bad guy, that doesn't help me explore the concept of what it means to die and what it means not to die. Instead, it just makes me confused.
Um, well, so favorite companions.
Before we get to that, I have a question for you, Kevin, because you once told me that this game had probably the best narrative in video games that you've ever experienced.
Okay, when you're 15, it doesn't take much to seem deep, Colin.
Well, I want to know, uh, have you changed your mind? And if so, why?
Yes, I have changed my mind. I don't know if it was because I was replaying the game, but not experiencing it for the first time, or that, I'm not 15 years old and edgy, but I thought the game kind of sucked.
Do you care? Why did it suck for you?
The combat was unenjoyable. The equipment limits were counterintuitive. No ranged person except for what's his face, that I didn't recruit.
Who you can miss, by the way.
Um, I don't know. Like I've played Baldur's Gate recently more than once over the past, since starting grad school and now, and it's held up so much. Baldur's Gate 2, I mean. So it's not just it's so old, the CRPG has evolved so much. It's the game, a lot of the game play is actively anti-fun to experience. The graphics I don't mind. The walls of text I don't mind. Now Colin does mind them.
I want to give the walls of text. Well, actually, I have to give the game credit for its walls of text because it revealed something to me that's actually very important. So the game is text heavy, and it does have options for increasing text size, but even when you bump it up to the largest, it's not that big. That's what she said. And I wear glasses. And I had been noticing over, the past last time I got an eye exam was like right when COVID hit. And before that, I hadn't had an eye exam in 10 years. So I'm starting to notice that my vision. So I decided, I noticed my vision was deteriorating again. So by means of playing Planescape, I came to the conclusion that I had to go to get my prescription renewed. And so I go and they do all the measurements. And when the eye doctor is meeting with me, she keeps saying things like, "Do you have a family history of glaucoma?" And when I said no, she kept asking me the question until I finally texted my mother, who tells me that her great grandfather did have glaucoma. Idiot used to drive blind. And according to my grandfather, apparently it skips a generation, which would mean that my great grandfather would have it, my grandfather would have it, and I could potentially have it. And there are some things going on with the pressures of my eyes. At some point, I have a referral that they didn't actually fill out correctly, so I'm not sure how that's going to work. But I need to get scans by an actual specialist so I can keep an eye on this thing, pun intended. What it means is that because of Planescape, uh, I'm still at a very, very low risk of getting glaucoma, but I can keep an eye on it. And if it develops, that I can get eye drops so I can keep my vision. So it's kind of to the game's credit that it forced me to go to the eye doctor to catch this potentially blinding condition. So thank you to Planescape. Its combat, on the other hand, number one, it's all real time, and there are so many problems with the combat, Kevin. So many problems. I don't even mind that it's a D&D based system in which you can be swinging at something and just not hitting them because you're not getting the dice rolls. I don't care about that. I don't care that it's real time, even though if you're a mage and you're using spells, then that kind of gets kerflooey. I mind that half the time the characters don't attack who you're telling them to attack. So there are so many times when you're just standing there, one person might be swinging and everybody else is standing around not doing anything because they've caught themselves in a space in which they don't think they have vision on the target. So the best way to solve this is to run away and then come back and hope that the party members will actually attack. But as you point out, everybody, except for one character who I never actually met, um, is not a ranged attacker. So everybody's in the grill of everybody else. And if you're a mage, many of your coolest spells do friendly fire. So I didn't want to use any of my spells because it would kill my own people. My own people, by the way, are the ones that are actually good at fighting. I'm not good at fighting, but I also didn't see an option to not send myself into combat unless I want to select everybody individually. You can either select everybody individually or everybody at once. So as a mage, most of my combat was standing in the middle of combat, stabbing somebody with a dagger that I found like a fourth of the way through the game because I couldn't find any upgrades for it.
Okay, so yes, the game mechanics, especially in combat, leave a lot to be desired. I picked the game was picked by someone because when that person was a middle teenager, the narrative seemed to overpower it sufficiently. 16 years later, and God, isn't that a horrifying thought? The flaws in the narrative cannot gild the lily anymore.
This is something that I was wondering when playing this. I've not played Baldur's Gate 1 or Baldur's Gate 2. And you've been singing its praises, which I'm now skeptical about, having played this on your recommendation. But you say that the combat there is actually lived up. So what's different about the combat in Baldur's Gate versus Planescape?
There's bows. Um, you can do more formations with the party members. Magic is done better. It's just the combat is so much more well done, and combat is expected to be a central, integral component of the game.
Does the party listen to you when you tell it to do things?
The party will not only do that, they will do spells, mage spells, priest spells that fit the occasion without you telling them.
Well, that is better than Planescape, that's for sure. I don't know. To me, like, so I think that these D&D games, I mean, Planescape especially, they're trying to recreate the experience that you get from playing tabletop D&D. And in some ways, it's better at doing that than actual tabletop D&D because with actual tabletop D&D, you have to take into account what other people want to do. This allows you to take your time, explore the city of Sigil at your leisure, using D&D systems, which I think is quite interesting. But something that always confused me about these early CRPGs that are trying to do D&D is that their combat systems are in real time, whereas in D&D it's turn-based. Now, granted, it's turn-based in which every round is supposed to last 6 seconds, so you could see how this would turn into a real-time combat system. But the game was designed as a turn-based system, And modern incarnations do that. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 is turn-based, much to its credit. Planescape could have been a lot more interesting if they turned it into a tile-based, turn-based RPG, keeping its narrative, especially its narrative choices and use of the D&D system there intact, and then find a way to turn, don't even have to find a way, just adapt D&D rule set to a tile-based turn-based system, and the combat is way more satisfying.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think that would be a good design choice. It would be such a different game, have to be rebuilt from the ground up for these tiles.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, it would actually make it so that their geography makes sense sometimes. So that you're not just clipping on different corners, or all of a sudden, like I'm in a bar, and somehow the nameless one gets caught in between two of the seats in the bar, so he can no longer move. And the only way that I could fix it was to switch over to Morte, who's a floating skull, by the way. Still don't know how that works. And move him out of the bar, which will magically teleport everybody out of the bar. So they'd have to fix that. So you want to know favorite companions?
We've talked about the nameless one. Does he have an arc? Do the companions have an arc?
Well, I'm feeling like I'm not equipped to answer the companion arc question because I kind of plowed through Dakon's quest chain in order to get all the goodies in there. Which apparently I shouldn't have done because if he has low morale at level 10, he gets a stronger blade, which I only found out later through a guide. So that's kind of counterintuitive, but okay. But I didn't spend a whole lot of time talking to Fall from Grace, didn't spend a whole lot of time talking to Anna. I never talked to Ignis at all. And in fact, left him when I went to the maze. So when the next time I saw him, he was attacking me in the Fortress of Regret. Um, because I did not engage with the characters, it's hard for me to tell you that if they had an arc or not. Morte, I think you're supposed to think that he has an arc, but ultimately he just comes down to he's been with you every single incarnation, but he's afraid of you on account of he never knows what kind of nameless one he's going to get. So him lying isn't really an arc or a character flaw. It's a survival tactic for a guy who's dead. Again, he's literally a floating skull.
Well, he does not want to be put back into the Pillar of
Right.
Skulls.
And why would you want to? I will say, in terms of like charm, he's the funniest character for sure. Basically all of the humor of the game revolves around Morte.
And that's not exactly a stiff competition.
No, but I will say that he is funny. Like that, I'm not trying to criticize the game for having all of the humor revolving around Morte. It's just a fact, but they do it very well. I found his encounters with Anna, his flirting with Fall from Grace. Every so often you're talking to somebody and he's asking, like, I bought him a prostitute. Gets me nothing, but I thought that was funny. And so, if I had to pick a character that I liked the most, it'd be Morte. But I don't know if I would say he has an arc. The Nameless one, I think it's impossible for the Nameless one to have an arc. And this is another thing that I was talking to you about yesterday, is that okay, the structure of the narrative is supposed to be discovering your past. There are other games that do this, like Geralt of Rivia in The Witcher 1. That's basically what that game is centered on, at least in the beginning. The difference between Geralt of Rivia and the Nameless one is that Geralt of Rivia is an actual character with personality traits, with a narrative. You can see how then when he's learning more about the world, how he views the world changes. You can say that he has an arc in The Witcher 1. Whereas the Nameless one is meant to be a player avatar. So while he has a past, and it's interesting for the player to find out what that past is as you come to this dawning realization that there are many versions of you. Well, the many versions of you mean that the version of you that you are right now, you are deciding what that is. You decide if you're want to be lawful good. You decide if you're true neutral. You're going to decide if you're chaotic evil. You can't have an arc. Just let me finish. You can't have an arc if
Does
you
it
are the
mean
character, unless you
does it
yourself change. And I don't think most of us probably don't change when we're playing a 20-hour RPG. But you were saying,
does it diminish any possibility of change if you consider the fact over what, thousands, hundreds of incarnations previously, there's almost certainly been one who was like the play style that you adopt for the game. Like, this is the final one, the final incarnation. And to play, you know, Cambion's advocate here, or Anna's advocate, does it roll of the dice, I guess, which one it is for the final one? Like, it's not changing, or is it so much as a roulette wheel being spun about, and whichever incarnation you get? Does that make sense?
I mean, I agree that that's how it seems to operate, ignoring the player agency here, but I guess in terms of like the physics or the metaphysics of the game, that's how it works. But I mean, I don't think that I don't see the nameless one really um grappling with anything or changing himself because the game is not structured that way. The game is focused as the nameless one as a player avatar. So by virtue of that, he cannot change. I have something else I need to bring up. You know what can change and might make your experience better if you do? The platform on which you play the game on. Because I decided to play it on PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5, but it's my PS4 copy. Because I already owned it. I like sitting on the couch. I like using the controller. And the controllers, I have to say, it took a little bit to get used to, but I think that the controller is actually pretty decent for this game. The only times that I found it frustrating was when I was in combat trying to target a specific enemy, but my whole party was on top of it, and so I couldn't get the mouse just right to pick it. But I think that would have been the same with a mouse anyway. So I don't really see that as a fault with the controller. But the problem with the PS4 version is that as the game gets closer to the end, it starts being very unstable. And there are a couple of game-breaking glitches to the point where I was this close to saying I'm not going to be able to finish the game because the game wouldn't let me. Luckily, I did finish the game. But I kept getting crashes the last 2 days of play, very frequently the last day of play. On top of that, okay, so there's a woman in your past named Deonara who it was your lover. And she still survives as a spirit. She's the one who teaches you the resurrection spell, which, if you don't find her, good luck succeeding in this game because you need it to resurrect any of your party members. But the game tells you where she is, and you should do some basic exploration, and you'll find her. Later on in the game, when you go into the Civic Fest Hall, by chance, I found our wedding bands. I found her sensory stone, went through her experiences, and I got a bunch of stuff. Uh, Went to collect the legacy from her father, who I now remember asked me to tell him what it said, and I never went back to tell him. So that sorry, Dayanara's dead. I was an asshole. In any case, so you get a wedding band, and the wedding band's a good piece of equipment. So I use it. And the guides all say, make sure to bring this with you to the Fortress of Regret. So great, I've done that. I find her, cool. And the guide says it's supposed to like really upgrade the ring to give it much more oomph. Great. All of a sudden, I have no companions. I need extra stats in order to survive this dungeon, I thought. So I talked to her, which apparently on the PS4 version, you are not allowed to do because the dialogue box just doesn't appear and you can't move. You can't do anything. The only thing you can do, Kevin, is at one point you can press the X button that will act as if there's a conversation. After that, you can't do anything. But the game acknowledges you're in a conversation because the nameless one will say, my journal, which I found to be like the last stab into my heart because the words updated my journal are imprinted into my memory because of this game. But anyway, so that's people have called that a game breaking bug. It's not because you don't actually have to talk to Dayanara. It just means that you're robbed of that moment, which I was pretty disappointed by. And then I
Yes.
reload. Some people have found that if you do the lever puzzle in I guess, the traditional order, once you get past Anna's killing scene, the game will auto pause and will never let you get out of pause. that's a game-ending bug if it's literally stopping your progress. Luckily, I did manage to avoid that. I did run into something where the game started telling me that if I died, it was game over and I could no longer complete the game, which has never been the case up to that point. So I was confused about that. But luckily, okay, the final lever puzzle, there's so many enemies. You try to fight them, you realize you can't, you're too weak, so you have to run. Turns out then you find a clock that tells you just to run. But in order to get there, I had to choose to run anyway. So that's not that helpful, but okay. So then you're running around, but the controls are so shit that you die a lot anyway. So the resurrection mechanic is, in my opinion, essential for actually solving this puzzle. So then when the game tells you, number one, stop dying or you won't be able to complete the game. Plus, it auto saved at that point, which meant that if I died at any moment after that, I could not finish the game and I had to reload to this point that it put me in without telling me that it put me in that position. Luckily, once you get past that room, you fight Ignis. Ignis is easy, and then you don't even have to fight the nameless, the transcendent one because I beat the game by accident, and so then that was fine. But all of this is to say that the PS4 version, while I liked the ability to use my controller to sit back, would that added to the enjoyment of the game. Plus, I got some trophies. It's not the most stable at the end, so I would encourage everybody to play the the Steam version. I don't know about the other console versions. Maybe the Switch version fixed it, but it's probably best enjoyed on PC. Well, do you have anything that you want to rant? Clearly, this game has caused some strong reactions from yours truly, but you're the one who picked the game. Do you have any strong reactions you want to share?
In retrospect, I do think the game bit off more than it could chew, but I applaud the game for trying to do something radically different with how an RPG is played and experienced, and the very personal, singular nature of the plot. How many RPGs have it where if you don't succeed in the plot, nothing much happens? Sigil will go on much as it has been. It's only important to you and your immediate companions. That's unusual. Even if it does not grapple with the questions successfully, these very individual questions I do think are interesting to contemplate. I like the you can get through almost anything with by talking, by being smart or wise. There's technically three people you have to kill in the game, leaving aside side quests and so forth. So it's ambitious in a good way. I like what it tried to do. I'll give it points for that. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. You gave it a 7 for you, the mechanics. I think the ambition gave it 1 point
Yeah.
higher in my esteem, an 8 out of 10 that I will never touch again.
Yeah, eight to me, 8 out of 10 is definitely too high. A 7 out of 10 is even me being a little bit generous. But I will say that I don't regret playing the game now that I have slept and process things a little bit and don't have to play it again. I am glad that I played it. I do think that it's an important game for the evolution of play, like the inclusion of player choice in an RPG. I play a lot of JRPGs. JRPGs don't tend to have this level of choice. That's one of the strengths of the Western
No.
RPG genre, and choices do matter in this game, almost to the point where I feel constrained to read a guide. But that's something that is almost a personal problem. Its ideas is very interesting. The systems that it's trying to incorporate, they're as you say, they're very ambitious, and sometimes they hit the mark. Sometimes they miss the mark. It's an interesting game. I personally don't like it that much, but I am glad that I played it.
That is that for the 2023 game challenge. We'll be doing one in 2024 with better selection criteria and forethought to make sure it still holds up.
So, I mean, we talked a bit about it in the last episode, which I haven't edited yet, but it's going to go live this Sunday, and then this episode that we're recording now will go live the Sunday after that. But this is our foundational games. Kevin wants to play some classic games, but I will say that I'm being a bit more judicious with my veto pen because last night Kevin thought that a great game to play would be the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, which no, I will not. No, I will not do that. Incorrect. I would encourage you to, if you want to expand your horizons, get the fuck away from Western RPGs.
Yeah, I'll look up JRPGs to play.
But I think at this point we'll have started calling for people to send in suggestions. So I'm looking forward to. By the time that this goes out, I will have seen those. I haven't seen them yet. I'm looking forward to seeing what people suggest, and then we'll figure out how to pick all of these. We'll probably have an episode early January going through that process because there'll be a poll that will decide one of them. But then also Kevin and I have to decide. Well, we have to put together our lists, and we'll spend some time talking about each game, which I'm looking forward to. That should come out early January. Wouldn't you agree?
Indeed, it should. Yes.
Awesome. Well, the last thing that we got to do this year is finish up chapter 4 from Trails of Pro. And I think we're going to be able to pull that off, I have to say.
Yeah.
We finished Planescape a little bit earlier than I thought we would.
Yeah, you started chapter 4 last night on the 13th, I believe.
Yeah, I did, but I also just got through the first cutscene in which the Scooby Gang makes carbonara with eggs and bacon, and I have many Italian friends who would throw a gasket because you would need to use guanciale or pancetta, but definitely guanciale and not bacon. So 0 out of 10, would never play again.
I'm sad to hear that. Trails in the pod over. It's a Planescape podcast now.
Well, anything else you want to say before we sign off?
I'll do better next time, I promise. One day, you'll play Baldur's Gate 2 or KOTOR 2 with the restoration mod, and you will see the possibilities. Until next time, I'm Kevin, you're Colin.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye bye.